Are you ready? Ready to bring a revolution to your relationships? Ready for the experiences on your dating adventure to evolve? Ready for more passion, intimacy, connection, and love in your relationship? Ready to heal past relationship wounds? You're in the right place. I'm Alan, the love engineer, and this is the Relationship Revolutions podcast. In this series, you'll get guidance and tips from me, interviews from other relationship experts, insights from couples who already have a great relationship, and other mind-opening conversations. G'day, and welcome to the latest episode of Relationship Revolutions, where this week I am joined by Marie Miller. So to start off with, Marie, first two questions. How are you and where are you?
I am doing amazing today, and I am in Columbus, Ohio, in the States.
Excellent. So we're going to be talking about something a little different to most of my episodes, though as normal, it's still all relationship based. And we're going to be talking about BDSM, dominance and submission, and how all these things can either affect your relationship in a positive way, or and also little things like if it's something you've been interested in for some time but don't know how to get into it and don't know how to approach these things with your partner, we can look into those as well. So would you be willing to share a little bit about your own journey to how you got to this point?
Absolutely. Um, I mean, part of it is if I really think back to my personality as a kid, I kind of always knew I was going to end up kinky. Like there wasn't any other way it was going to be. I did have these fleeting fantasies as of getting kidnapped by Shredder from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. Even though I'm not currently into kidnap fantasies, it was interesting. Like that is what I thought about when I was a younger person, exploring. But when I was 18 and started going to goth clubs, there was a stage show off to the corner. So I'd mostly be dancing, and people were getting flogged or doing electricity over there. And one of my good friends was one of the mistresses. One night, somebody who was tied to a chair kind of bucked a little bit and came down on her foot. But she didn't want to stop the show, so she screamed at me, pulled me up on stage, put floggers in my hand, and just walked me through how to do everything. And I was pretty hooked at that point. And then that just became the thing that you do on a Friday night is you go flog people at a goth club.
First question for me comes up, why Shredder?
Oh, I just thought he was really gorgeous. When he took the mask off in one of the movies, I'm like, oh my God, he's so hot. He was just one of my first crushes.
Interesting. So yeah, I think a lot of the girls when I was at school back in the probably primary school days, it would have been more sort of He-Man or something.
Maybe. I mean, I also had a huge crush on Doogie Howser, so you can see I'm really putting myself in a specific date. Um, Huge crush on Neil Patrick Harris when he was much, much younger.
Doogie Howser was cool.
He was.
How yet to be that smart before you actually leave school, I dread to think, but anyway. Some people must do it.
Yeah.
So that was your first introduction to the kink scene.
Hmm.
How does it explore from there?
Well, from there, I became really good friends with the gentleman who would do the electroplay, and that also became my thing. I loved receiving electroplay to the point where, because back then I would sew my own costumes for the goth club. I would just, sit in my apartment and make all these wacky things to wear. And I would actually sew metal and ribbons into them so that when you zapped me here, it would travel to specific places to make it even more fun. And to me, what I loved is the fact that I could get an orgasm with my clothes on and without any like of the normal sexual touch. It was like an alternative way to get there. And or like the secret thing because you're like fully clothed in public and having this huge experience. And so I'd go to,
Amazing.
yeah.
So, just for clarity for anyone listening who's not really looked into the world of kink or anything like that, when you talk about electro play, you're not talking about plugging yourself into the household electric socket.
No, that would be a little extreme. There's actually things that we call violet wand units, or there's Mjolnir. Mjolnir is one of the other companies. There's a few companies out there that make these units. And what I love is, as soon as electricity was invented, these little boxes were invented. And so people have actually been zapping themselves for pleasure for a long time. It started out as a holistic health device. I know they sell really low power ones to do facials, but it's literally just a controlled amount of electricity going either through the practitioner's hands into you when you're doing the body contact, or through different devices that you put on it, like different light bulbs that glow really cool, or there's combs, there's glass things, metal things. Yeah, and you sort of play with it till you find the sensation that you like.
Like, surprising how many things like that were originally designed for medical purposes that get adapted for other things, because the original vibrators were designed by a doctor.
Hmm.
Scarily enough, so were chainsaws. Luckily, they're not involved with BDSM.
I mean, unless you're into certain kind, I mean, I could imagine someone using it as part of like a kidnapping scene. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah, I would think that'd be quite scary, but each to their own, I guess. So, aside from that electro play,
Hmm.
what was the what have been the biggest sort of things that you've enjoyed, shall we say?
Well, after that came getting into receiving flogging, since, like I said, I was the one who was always giving it. Because I remember the first time I got blindfolded and flogged in front of like a huge group of people at a conference. That was like a pretty pivotal moment in my journey, was being able to receive that. Um, and then later on came rope play. So I've been being suspended for like the last couple of years, which is pretty fun, and found out that I'm what they call an eel when it comes to rope. And an eel is the other
And
word
that
for that.
means what?
Yeah, pretty much being a Houdini, where your partner spends like a half an hour very lovingly and carefully tying you up so that you can't escape. And then you sort of like shake all of them off and laugh maniacally. And we time it. I think my longest has been 3 minutes. So of course we had to sit down with my partner and help him understand, because it bruises the ego of the top a lot when you spend all that time and all that thought being like, oh, there's no way they can possibly get out of that. And then of course I do. And for me, that's the thrill. Like, we were just learning new tie in class yesterday that could be used for suspension, and so he would tie it up, and then instead of letting me out, I'd have to get myself out of it each time.
Certainly sounds a little bit different to a lot of the rope play I've seen before. But having said that, most of the stuff I've seen has been either the preparation, the finished article, but not necessarily how the restrained party, shall we say, actually gets out of the ropes.
Yep. I mean, I will behave nicely and I won't brat or anything when we're doing suspension because there's a safety issue. But if I have energy after being suspended, because that will kind of wipe you out, right? It puts you in a beautiful headspace. Then I will sometimes eel out of those ropes, which is a little bit trickier because, suspension ties are more particular. And oftentimes, depending on what we're using, I can't always reach some of the knots if they're like right between my shoulder blades.
Yeah, I can see some experienced tops using knots in that place for that very reason.
Well, there has to be a certain percentage chance of me to get out for it to even be fun for me. There is a particular tie that my teacher showed us that is one thin rope, but it's just everything's positioned in such a way it's nearly impossible once you get it right. I did escape from it once, but the second time it became impossible when he tightened it up a little bit. And so that particular knot is forbidden.
I see. So what I'm sensing from the way you're talking, and I like to think that a lot of listeners who are new to this arena will also be sensing the same thing, that contrary to what may have been displayed in 50 Shades, it's not all about sex.
No, in fact, I didn't even mix sex and kink for a long time. The beginning levels of my kink were all very public. They were in scenes where like people were mostly clothed, at least underwear was kept on. There was no actual sexual contact. I'm used to this being like a thing that you do with friends. And so I've only been kinky with 3 partners my whole life, but I flogged thousands of people. So
Interesting. So if someone was listening to this and thinking, oh, this sounds very interesting, and I'm a bit nervous to approach the topic with my partner, how could I, what's the best way of bringing it up?
So even though we know that 50 Shades doesn't show the negotiation the way it would ideally happen, honestly, sitting down and watching, like bringing up the topic through that, or watching, there's also the movie Secretary, which I think is good. Again, doesn't show the negotiation, but I think it shows a really healthy way, a healthy progression of it, because she does get a lot of healing by the end, and it feels like they have a good balanced relationship. So bringing it up in media and sort of skirting around the topic, or what do you think of this, would be a good way just to broach the topic.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what it's like in the UK. I know in the US we have munches all the time. So also joining FetLife, but not using it as a dating site, just as a resource, and going on and finding the munches, which for those who are unfamiliar is basically literally like a meal that is shared. It's like a potluck in the park, or you go to a pizza place and you just talk like normal human beings with other kinky people. And so it's a really nice base layer of safety for people to be in, because there's no pressure to do anything. And you can ask tons of questions and sort of get the scoop on which are the best events around town to try out for beginners.
Yeah. Yeah, there are munches in the UK. I've, the ones I've either been to myself or had clients or friends that have been to haven't actually included any sort of meals or anything, but quiet drink or board games and stuff like that, then yeah, that certainly happens, and you can meet some very interesting characters.
So I think the board game ones are my favorites.
Yeah, yeah, something kind of a bit of an icebreaker and just something fun to do whilst you're there.
Yeah.
You can also spot the bad losers. So you mentioned that the negotiations in 50 Shades didn't go the way they should have done, or the way that you would have liked. If you were the editor of that, how would you have done it differently?
Of course, I'm basing it off the books because I never actually read it. I didn't actually see the movies, but for so maybe they changed in the movies. But in the book, her needs and her considerations and her desires were not even considered. Like, he just said, here, sign this. And she agreed to things without even knowing what they were, without any intake of like what she actually wanted out of the relationship. And to me, that's more of like, when abusers get into kink for all the wrong reasons, it would have that mentality to me. So I had trouble even finishing the book because of that.
Yeah,
Because it really should be like the two of you sitting down and both expressing your needs, wants, and desires, and balancing those out and making sure
yeah,
that both parties are being heard and respected.
yeah. I've not read the books. I have seen the movies. I was introduced to them by a partner I was seeing at the time, and a couple of things that stood out to me in the first one was, firstly, yes, they did address those issues and sort of take her wants into account a little bit. And then the next thing was they actually had sex before any contract or agreement was reached, which is not necessarily a good idea. And then a bit later in the movie, she asks him, how bad does it get? Sort of how bad does the pain get? Where, from my understanding, a good dominant or a good top would be saying something like, well, it stops as soon as you hit that safe word. But that's not what happens. He says, let me show you. So he restrains her, bends her over, and says, I'm going to belt you, whip you, whatever, 6 times. And then, and you need to count the number of times and everything. So you can clearly see from the body language he's not comfortable after 2 strikes. And he still does all 6. And for me, from at that point, he goes from being a dominant, using strong air quotes here, to an abusive arse in about 5 seconds, and also gives that style of that sort of lifestyle and not a great impression. Although she does leave him, for me, the damage is done at that point.
Yeah. And those kind of doms are the reason I decided to become really, really vocal and to become a spokesperson for this lifestyle and to go into education. Because I hear so many stories of someone who's like, I met someone on Craigslist, I met someone on an app, I went to his house, he had a dungeon basement, he beat me black and blue, I didn't know I was allowed to say no, and I was too embarrassed to seek medical help. And unfortunately, I hear that story like several times a year still.
Yeah.
And it's because people have this impression that the dom gets to do whatever they want and the sub doesn't get to say no. Or that you're weak or you shouldn't say your safe word. Although for me, I've actually, because of my history, when I get triggered in a particular way, and it's only happened a couple times in my life, I forget safe words exist. And so my safe word is no, or F you, or stop it. So I just can't, I don't play with CNC.
Yeah. And for those who aren't aware what CNC stands for, because in different areas of the world it means different things. So I know there's a lot of cutting machinery that's called CNC, that's computer design stuff. So in this instance, what does CNC stand for?
It stands for consensual non-consent. It's when people want to work through their rape fantasies or have the stranger break in. So that way, when you're saying stop or no, that actually it is not taken into account. You actually have to say the safe word to get them to stop. And with CNC, that's the other thing too. That takes 3 times as much negotiation. I know people who do it who will actually do like a video beforehand and go through extra precautions just to make sure, especially for legalities.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
something.
I've spoken to a couple of people that have done it. One said they'd never do it again. And another one said she found it very, very therapeutic from actually addressing the emotions and stuff from when she was raped in the past.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the therapy or healing I would recommend for anyone, though especially not as a first attempt at healing. It's it can work, but like I say, I certainly wouldn't recommend it. And it's not something I would do myself.
It is not something to be entered into lightly. I mean, none of BDSM is. There should always be a conversation around everything, but 10 times as much if you're going to go into a CNC scene.
Yeah.
It needs to be pretty much talked to death until you're almost tired of talking about it.
Yeah, and I would say similar things for pretty much anything, including blood, knife play, breath play, and all those kinds of things, because the risks are very, very high.
Yep. And actually, even with rope is one of the most dangerous ones,
Yeah.
especially if you're
Yeah, I've
self-suspended.
heard it's,
Mother.
yeah, I've heard it said if you're a dominant or a top and working with rope, if you're not prepared to cut the rope, don't buy any.
Yep.
So I think if somebody's restrained by rope and they want to get out, they want to get out now, not in
Mm-hmm.
10 minutes when you've undone all the knots and fed all the ropes through and everything else.
Yep. So you always keep your safety shears on hand, or actually, a lot of people use those seatbelt cutters.
Yeah.
A nice way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Not necessarily a carving knife or anything like that.
Yeah, because you can't always do the quick release ties. You can use quick release ties in the bedroom, but you're not going to be using them in suspension as much.
Yeah.
So that's really going to hold.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of difference between the knots and stuff with this kind of thing than what they taught us in the Cubs and Scouts.
It's some of the same basic knots. You're just, layering them and using them differently.
Yeah. But for some reason, they don't tell you that you can do this with rope when you're in the Cubs.
No.
Has anyone seen the guides? Well, no, not since they met the Cubs at that camp. They're all tied up to a tree somewhere. What could possibly go wrong?
Right.
So you mentioned that sometimes you forget your safe words. If a dominant or a top has a sub or a bottom that's maybe liable to also forget their safe words or may not bother to use them for whatever reason, what suggestions or tips would you give to those dominants?
There's well, you want to ask the sub for a secondary signal. So one thing is you can hold something in your hand, like a glow stick if you're in a club, so you can drop it. I work with a sub that when she goes nonverbal, and it's not a trauma thing, you just get so nonverbal that you literally can't speak, because when you're in that beautiful headspace, sometimes voices get lost. So she has a little thing where she lifts her left foot up or her right foot up in a particular way. But also, as the dominant, just being really tuned into all of their body language. And part of it is learning what is nonverbal, what does a happy nonverbal look like for this person? What does like the stress look like in the person? So you're saying in 50 Shades, you could tell with the body language after two hits, she was like not loving it. And so staying super tuned into the body language of your bottom, and honestly taking the time to get to know, which is why you also want to progress really slowly and not amp things up too quickly, so that you know their limits without them having to tell you, and so that you understand what a twitch like that means, or what the tiny little motions look like in their body. Because for some people, when they're nonverbal, sometimes if they're too still, then you know that they're not having as much fun, but it's going to vary from person to person.
Yeah. And also depends on situation as well, because obviously if they've got a ball gag or something, they're not going to be able to safe word for a start. And if they're restrained, how much they can sort of lift the foot up or the hands or whatever is going to be strictly limited. So as you say, it really does come down to knowing the partner you're with and building those deep levels of trust.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's when it really gets fun, though, is when you know someone well enough to know like what to do next. Because you're gonna always talk through the scene every time, but it's really, I love it when you have enough of a relationship built enough of the knowledge to just instantly know where to go next, to take them on a journey that they can relax into.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when you're crystal clear on where their limits are and
Mhm.
what you've done before, what's had a positive effect and
Mhm.
what's had an amazing effect, and then you can just kind of navigate the path however you want, as long as you stay within those limits.
Absolutely.
I remember something I heard at one of the first munches I ever went to, and it was actually the guy who was leading the group, talking someone else who was fairly new to it, talking about limits and things. He says, one of my most important limits is, and boundaries is, I do not take my partner outside of her limits, because if I cross her limits, I cross my own as well. I thought that was very, very, very powerful, and should be with all areas of life, not just kink.
Absolutely. And honestly, I'm not even trying to find someone's limit. I know some people are. I know there's some DOMs who want to
Yeah.
push towards and find the outer limits. And I only do that if that's what someone's requesting. I'm looking to get them into that really, really sweet zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think with the current culture, certainly in the UK, but I would think in the States and Canada and pretty much all of the Western world, we're all living with so much stress 100% of the time. If you can find something that allows that head to just quiet, whether that be meditation, whether it be kink, it's certainly good for mental health and emotional health, for that matter. Because let's face it, most of us are going to get bored sitting on a mountain in India just saying
Right? When you can get that same sensation, just getting a really good rhythmic flogging and just go into that quiet headspace where everything shuts out for a while.
So do you feel it's important for the dominant one to, at some point in their life, experience what it's like to be the submissive?
Yeah, mostly because you need to know how the tools feel when they're hitting you. Like when you get a new tool, I always hit myself with every new tool that I'm going to play with. So I understand the sensation that I'm giving. So when they say, I like this sensation or that sensation, I actually know which thing to pick up. So part of it's really practical.
Yeah.
You really need to understand like what sensation you're giving. I know old school, when I first got into the scene, they're like, you have to be a sub for like 2 years before you can even think about doming, but that's sort of the old guard mentality. I don't know if it
Yeah.
needs to be that extreme, but you do need to have an idea of what you're doing to the person.
Yeah, because I've heard it, things said in leadership conferences where they sort of say, well, if you're not willing to follow any somebody else, you're not suitable to be a leader. And I think it's very much the same within the kink world.
And we're actually seeing so many more switches coming up. Because I remember when I first came out as a switch in the 90s, everyone's like, oh my God, you're a unicorn. That's so rare. And I'd go to parties and everybody freak out. And now I go out and like you're meeting just so many people who identify as a switch. And I think part of that is because we're loosening like the strict definition of masculine and feminine these days, and we're having an opening because it was tied to one or the other, or people were going into the extremes. But I just think that we're realizing that we all have the ability to be in both roles, and that we're allowed to flow between both roles. And it's okay for people who think that they need to be in charge or doms. It's okay for them to like receive every once in a while.
Yeah.
And I think it's really beautiful that we're just seeing more and more switches out there.
So do you notice any correlation between whether someone's more dom or sub and their occupations?
I mean, it's often said that people in high-powered positions like to be subs a lot, just because if they're stressed out from work, if they're making big decisions, like there's been there's an organization I used to be involved in near Washington, D.C., that's just full of politicians. So oftentimes you're going to find people in high-powered positions who really want to turn off everything. Like they literally, because that's the thing, being a dom, it does take a lot of mental and emotional effort. So people who feel
Yeah.
like they're being drained by their day. And the thing is, my partner and I both run businesses. Like he's a CEO and I run my own business. So we have to be like, no, you be the dom sometimes, because we're both in a space of like exhausted from doing all the work. So we just work through who's going to be the
Yeah.
dom, who's going to be the sub each day.
So you get home from work, your making muscle is completely worn out, and then your partner says, "So what do you want for dinner?" I don't care. Just something I like. I don't want to decide.
He doesn't want to decide, so I make the list at the beginning of every week, and then I get all the meals made for me, so it works. Like I'll do 10 minutes of mental work to not think for the rest of the week.
That sounds like a fair thing.
Yeah, it was one of our earliest negotiations.
I've heard people say that BDSM and kink style relationships aren't romantic. Is that true?
I, they are if you want them to be. We're incredibly romantic. It just depends on what you're looking for. And I guess maybe they're, people who say that might just be looking at the fact that they're flogging each other, but even that can be super romantic. Like one of the things I requested for our Valentine's Day trip was I'm like, can you hog tie me in front of the fireplace and read me some Ambrose Bierce short stories? Which I know is a weird request, but it was like the sweetest, most romantic thing. Because I think it's romantic when you put out these strange requests and they're like, sure, honey, we'll do that. Because it really is about asking and being heard. And what's more
Yeah.
romantic than being truly heard by your partner?
Yeah. And I think that's certainly not a gender specific thing or a kink specific thing, because I hear so many people that are going through divorce, and some of the big things is they didn't feel heard, they didn't feel seen, they didn't feel understood. And it all goes back to that communication stuff, which from the vanilla world isn't always there.
I think the vanilla world could learn a lot from kink when it comes to communication, because I realize some of the things, like in this in our regular life, that I might be getting a little upset about. I'm like expecting him to be psychic, and I'm the psychic one in the relationship, right? And not clearly asking, because also understanding who my partner is, that he does not take hints. I had to say hello to him every single day in high school, and his best friend had to tell him, by the way, Marie has a crush on you, ask her out, you idiot, before he would ask me out the first time, right? Like he did not take hints at all. So I had to literally say, hey, I want you to buy me flowers occasionally. That's going to make me feel important. And I actually had to say, it's really important for me to actually hear out loud the words, I love you. We can't just take it for granted. Like my brain needs to hear those. And so just training him on the ways that I want to accept and receive love makes me feel really, really heard and seen in really mundane, easy ways. And I don't know if everyone takes the time to work with their partner. And he's like, what I really need is lots of snuggles. So, because his love language or the way he accepts love is to actually like be in the same place together in the same room. And so
Okay,
for
so
him, receiving love from me is like we're both on our computers watching Star Trek together and working on our separate websites. And that's intimacy for him outside of the bedroom.
interesting, because I speak to a lot of people whose love language is physical touch, and they need that a lot of that touch. And though if someone's love language is quality time, that sort of sat there looking at individual screens, doing your own thing, wouldn't be intimacy at all.
It is for us because we're next to each other and we like reach out and be like, "Oh, I love you," and like we'll do our little call and response, because every time someone says a sweet nothing, the other one will respond like, "Hey, handsome, hey, beautiful," and we do this little thing. So we're like basically connecting in really, really small ways that work for each of us throughout the day.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
It's one of the things I've talked through with my clients is that it's the little things that really are the big things.
The number of um, videos he sends me throughout the day, because that's also how he shows love. There's time, because he gets up way early than I do. Like, I'll wake up, about now, and I'll look at my Instagram messages, and there's like 6 cute videos of cats and penguins and dad jokes just filling it. And that's just him thinking about me, which I love.
Yeah, my partner does things like that as well. So, but it's not just Instagram, it'd be Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all of it. And it's sort of, some of it will be a video that might help me understand her mindset in that moment. Some of it's just because it's cute, and some of it's like, oh, I saw this and I thought of you, so I thought I'd share it.
Mhm. He sends me dad jokes not because he thinks that they're funny. He actually will roll his eyes every time I tell him, but because I think they're hysterical. So, and I love the fact that he's actually actively searching things that he thinks are ridiculous, but he knows that I love.
Excellent.
Mhm.
So you mentioned he had to say hello to, you had to say hello to him every day in high school. So I'm guessing you met in high school and you've been together ever since, or?
Oh no, that would have been nice. We did date for a while. I broke up with him because I was, I was 16. We're kind of idiots at those age. And he was in college by then, because I was in my first year of school and he was in his last year of high school when we first met. Um, and his little brother was in my class too. And it just got too much for me, the stress and a lot of things about life. And he got married like right away to someone else and had kids. So like basically I lost him and reconnected about 20 years later, just randomly.
So for those people that say, "Oh, never go back,"
It was one of those. I'm like, yeah, we ended it for a reason, right? Um, but that was also, we changed a lot, because the truth
yeah,
was, when I was at that age, I was still carrying these beliefs in my body really strongly that love was going to kill me. So anytime someone was about to fall in love with me, every time love was starting to really blossom in my heart, I would freak out, and I would, for very rational at the time reasons, break up with the person, because of course there were flaws with them. Yeah. And so I spent most of my life running away from love. And once I learned how to accept it, he came back. And it was really nice, I think, because I'm like, oh, I got it right the first time. Because he was the first person I really had a mad crush on.
that's
I
a
mean,
very
that I met in real
interesting
life.
belief that
Mhm.
love is going to kill you. Do you know what was behind that, or?
Oh, yeah. Because society teaches us that your sisters love you dearly and that they're your first best friend. And my older sister, there were times where it felt like she was literally trying to kill me, because she was really, really physically abusive. She actually she actually hit me with a 2x4, which is a huge piece of lumber. At one point, knocked the wind out of me. There were a lot of beatings when I was a kid from her.
Yeah, for some reason, I've just developed a lot more gratitude for the sister that I actually have.
Yeah,
Sometimes we
what?
haven't got on over the years, but yeah, she's never done anything quite that bad.
Yeah, she was a terror. She definitely had things going on that made her. I mean, she terrorized the whole town. So yeah.
So, is there any connection between the beatings you had from your sister and the desire for kink?
I don't believe so. Um, because they feel so different. Because when it was with her, there was anger, there was screaming, and I don't do humiliation play, giving or receiving. And with her, there was a lot of humiliation, like a lot of screaming, a lot of talking negatively about me. So I know some people, they turn their traumas into kink, and I think I avoid my traumas and my kink and go with things that are going to be more soothing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, really. Because last thing you want in the middle of kink scene or a relationship where kink is involved is to be getting triggered all the time from something that should be fun.
Yeah. And that's why you need to talk about your traumas. That's part of, like, and 50 Shades, I don't know if they talked about that in the movie. That's why that needs to be a part of your negotiation from the get-go. Is
Yeah.
what traumas have you been through? What, do you even know what your triggers are? And if we accidentally trigger the sub, what aftercare is needed to get them to a place of safety again?
Yeah. And also, I think it's good to have the conversation of what is trauma to you, because some people think, oh, well, I've never been raped, I've never been abused, therefore I've got not got any traumas. But then when you think back to a 4-year-old child just being in a separate aisle in a supermarket to their parents is trauma.
Exactly. Because trauma is so relative, right? We're just now learning that trauma is not so much about the thing that happened, but about your ability to seek care and to actually talk about it afterwards. If you have no one to go to after a thing happens, you're more likely to be traumatized than if you have that safe person to express your emotions to. And since my dad didn't know what to do with my emotions and would kind of laugh about them or make fun of me when I was crying, be like, oh, you're mad at the world. And my mom would also didn't know what to do with my emotions. I had nowhere to go when things happened. Like after my sister beat me, I would go to my mom and she'd be like, oh, you guys need to work it out. And like would not intervene or help. And so what could have just been like a thing, if I would have received the comfort afterwards, it might not have hurt as bad.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize that there was abuse in my childhood. In college, I was telling myself that like I actually had a happy childhood. I had this perception that my childhood was beautiful and happy and glorious, and there was nothing wrong with it. I was a perfectly normal human being. And what really struck me was I was dating this comedian in LA, and we went to one of his friends' house, right, who had kids. And the kids started screaming and beating each other up. And I'm like, oh, hey, that's cute. They're doing what siblings do. Because I had this perception that siblings beating the shit out of each other was a perfectly normal thing.
Yeah.
And he called me out on it on stage, which is why we didn't date for much longer. He didn't address it to me. He made fun of it. He basically called me out about that on stage. In a way that helped me understand. I'm like, wait, that isn't a normal thing. Like siblings should not be violent. And that was when I really woke up and started to do the healing journey to realize, oh wait, maybe my childhood wasn't like hunky dory.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I think if they're continually violent towards each other, it's because it hasn't been dealt with effectively the first time. Because all kids get attached to the toys, and if brother or sister takes it without permission, they're gonna get angry, and chances are they are gonna get physical. But they still need to learn the lessons of that at that age, not necessarily 20 odd years later.
Yep.
Unfortunately, once that pattern is set, can be stuck for a long time. Your brother or sister upsets you, you hit them to solve the problem. Once you get married, your wife or husband upsets you, you hit them to solve the problem.
Yeah, she was still hitting me in high school. And that's when I got really buff because I spent a lot of time in the weight room.
So how did you deal with it when you were a teenager? Did you ever retaliate or?
No, because by then it was like she was really wild. So the safest thing to do was to curl up in a ball. So I never retaliated against her, but I did, like I said, I did become a weightlifter. So
Yeah.
I worked it out that way. I worked it out after the fact. And she got better, honestly, once I introduced her to her husband, who's a good friend of mine, and she had kids, she worked through all those things. She's a really great mom.
Excellent.
And her kids do not fight. So yeah.
That's a good sign. Sign of healing and growth.
It really is. And I've been able to work, so we're good now. We've been able to work things out.
So I take it she's no longer got the two by four.
No, she doesn't.
If there's one thing, what's the biggest thing that you think people need to know that about the world of kink and dominance and submission that's not necessarily advertised or talked about? What would it be?
That the sub is really the one in control. If you're starting with that premise that it is about the sub's enjoyment first and the dom's enjoyment second, instead of the other way around, I think that's going to lead people in the right direction with their communication.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Even though in some ways they are still equal, because if you haven't got a sub, you're not dominant of anything.
Yep.
And if you haven't got a dom, then you're not submitted to anything. So I can see how a lot of people can look at it from the outside and say, oh, it's a form of codependency. And maybe it is, but at the same time, it can also be some kind of beautiful role play.
Yeah.
It's just a lifetime role.
Absolutely. Well, and also too, the importance of the sub really communicating their needs, and subs are allowed to speak up, and that you're allowed to say no to your dom, and that you can, and that there's no shame in using your safe word.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it really is about understanding that as the sub, you have power, and as a dom, being responsible with the power that you have over your sub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it's almost like an illusion of power exchange, because you think, oh, the dom's taking the power from the sub, where really the sub is giving it to them
Yep.
with consent, providing they do what they say and play within certain boundaries. And in some ways, it's a little bit like you vote for your president or whatever. That is consensual, providing they fit in certain boundaries. I'm not going to comment as to whether this one or the last one or any previous ones did or didn't or whatever. But it's like the people. Sometimes the people of the country might want to, like, hang on a minute, safe word, you're crossing boundaries here. But anyway, let's not digress in that direction.
A whole other, yeah.
A completely different podcast.
Yep. But yeah, it is sort of like the solution of here, hold my power for a minute. I'll take it back when we're done. Just hold it for me.
Yeah, let me chill out for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Let me just relax, go into that super beautiful headspace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we're not supposed to be in our heads as much as we are.
We're not. And like, it's much, much easier doing this than a guided meditation, to be honest. Like when you get it right, I find like under the perfect conditions, you just slip into that headspace really, really well, really, really easily. And for me, it's about being in a space where all the rules are really clear. There's one space that I play in where it's a mix of people from different lifestyles. So it's not just kink; it's also poly people. It's E&M. It's like people in open relationships. And drinking is allowed. So when you're trying to scene there's people who, like, I was flogging someone Saturday night, and someone like hit her harder, and I gave her like the death stare, because having those random things when you're public can take you out of the headspace really quickly, versus when you're in a kink only space and everyone plays by the rules and you know that everything's going to be perfect. It's really easy to drop into that perfect headspace.
Yeah.
But at the same time, statistically, I think, what is it, like 80% of the people are doing kink at home, at least in the US, and not out in spaces. Because there's only a small percentage of the kink community that actually goes to these events.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that's probably true for this country as well. So,
and considering how well attended some of these events are, it's like there's lots of kinky people in the world.
I think there's probably more that are than are not, in all honesty.
Yeah, because I think some people define kink just literally as BDSM, but my definition of kinky is a little bit broader. It's actually like opening it up to anything that's pushing your edges a little bit and feels a little bit out of the norm. So the stricter the norms are, the more I think the more kinky people are just in it, just right being relative to what the norms are. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons people don't want to bring up the fact they have kinky thoughts or kinky desires is that fear of being labeled a pervert.
Mm-hmm.
And a while back, I heard a description of what is a pervert. Well, it's somebody that's more sexually adventurous than you are,
Yeah.
which kind of made sense a little bit.
Yep. Which is so judgy.
It is.
Being more adventurous should be like, yeah, you go. Not my thing, but have fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
I'm very much into the don't yuck other people's yum energy.
How can anyone reach out to you or find you or get in touch with you if they'd like to know more, either about what you do or just to have a conversation about kink with somebody who knows what they're talking about?
Um, through my business, which is House of Kellen, and that's spelled Kellen. So houseofkellen.com on Facebook, I'm there. I have a TikTok page you can reach me through. I randomly do videos, so I'm not the greatest TikTok creator. And also on Instagram. And so you can set an appointment. You can just do a discovery call if you just want to see if we're good to work together, but you can also just, yeah, set up time to just talk about kink. I also, a couple times a year with my partner, do retreats in different locations. And it is a mix of, in the morning, we do energy healing because that's my vanilla day job, even though we still talk about it if the client wants to. Um, so we do energy healing in the morning and really work through the traumas in a really deep way and help people release and work on communication skills. In the afternoons, we go into labs on how to be kinky and just do skill shares and things like that.
That's very interesting. What's the connection between energetic wounds and either kinky lifestyles or intimate lives, shall we say?
Well, my focus is when I'm doing the energy healing is releasing shame from you and from the different generations, releasing blocks in the throat chakra, bringing in acceptance, because when you fully love and accept yourself, when you've like healed the trauma or released it from your body and you've released the society's perceptions of what you're supposed to be as a sexual being, then it gives you the freedom to just be like, hey, can you do this weird thing for me in a place of empowerment?
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
So, final question for today. And it's a question I ask everybody. I don't prime them for, unless they've listened to previous episodes, in which case they know what's coming. But you may even have answered this as we go through. I don't know. But the question is this: as this podcast is called Relationship Revolutions, if there were one thing that will bring a revolution to the world of dating and relationships, in your opinion, what would it be?
Being really, really honest with yourself about who you are and what you really want.
Beautiful. So I think there might be one or two people listening to this saying, is she saying I'm not honest?
Well, what I'm saying is sometimes we become the person we think that they want
Yeah.
instead of being the person we are, and trusting that we can be accepted for who we really are.
Yeah. So much of the early years impact who we are. So, because we don't want to get abandoned, we want to be loved. So a good boy or girl will do this, behave like this. So, well, I want to be loved, so I'm going to behave like that, even though I have a natural thing that's pulling me over this way to behave very, very differently.
Yeah.
So I think that's where the honesty comes in, is being really knowing who we are on the inside
Mm-hmm.
and living that on the outside as well.
Yep. being your 100% weirdest self, however that looks for you.
Well, it looks kind of normal to me, but
Me
might not
too.
be the normal for everyone.
Yep.
What is normal anyway?
Yep. I don't think anyone's really what society considers normal. I think every one of us has got a little bit of weirdness, and that we should all embrace it.
Thank you for listening. And if you haven't already, please leave me a review on your preferred podcast platform. Click the like button and also subscribe so that you get the new episode notifications. I'm curious, what did you take away from this episode? Please share your takeaways with me. Send me an email to relationship-revolutions@theloveengineer.rocks.